shoot, man, you all right? Look, I don't know what to do. Give me a sec. I'm gonna call for help. I'm gonna call someone here. Hang with me, bro. You're gonna be all right. Yeah, I got a gunshot wound down here. I need help right away.
What would you do in that situation? You come along someone who's been injured by a gunshot, maybe you're at the range or up in the mountains hunting, or God forbid, you find yourself in the middle of a mass shooting and you're in a position to help those around you. Would you even know what to do or where to start? I know I wouldn't, and that's where the idea for this video came from. If I ever found myself in that position, I want to at least have the training and confidence to give someone the best chance of survival until first responders arrive. Now, to clarify, this video is not intended for the medical professional. I created this video to help the everyday person like me with little to no medical experience on how to treat a gunshot wound, and more specifically on the best practices one can utilize to keep a gunshot victim alive until first responders arrive on scene. To help me out along the way, I've asked one of my best friends and one of the best people I know to help out. I'll let him introduce himself and some of his credentials now.
My name's Nick. I'm a local paramedic here in the state of Utah. Trained for about 10 years in emergency medical services, EMT, paramedic. Also have advanced level training in trauma through previous employment as a flight paramedic. Unfortunately, yes, I have been on gunshot victims. I've had the misfortune of being the paramedics that have responded to police-involved shootings with suspects and things like that. So I've taken care of a fair amount of gunshot wound victims.
Before we get into details for specific areas on the body in which they're wounded, let's just talk about general best practices with gunshot wounds. The number one priority with any gunshot wound is to control the bleeding.
At the end of the day, there's going to be bleeding. Depending on where that bleeding's coming from and what type of tissues and or vessels that the bullets have struck will determine kind of the severity of it. So worst case scenario would be like an arterial bleed, which a person can bleed out almost instantaneously from that, because every time the heart beats, it squeezes out a large blood volume with that, and you can bleed out in 30 seconds to a minute in one of those type of situations. So we're usually there within 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the time that page happens and where we're at and things like that. But in that time, if somebody has a penetrating wound that has struck an artery and they're bleeding heavily, 3 to 5 minutes, if nothing's done prior to us getting there, they may have lost too much blood, and we don't have any way of being able to replace blood in the field. So it could be something that if someone acted on scene, they could potentially save their life just by stopping the bleeding, or even minimizing the bleeding if they can't completely stop it, but just by applying pressure and controlling massive hemorrhage and just keeping it minimal. In these type of situations, stop the hemorrhaging first, control the bleeding, and then when we get there, we'll work on if they need like airway support and things like that. That would be something. But for just a general person at the gun range or at home or something like that, my recommendation would be to control the bleeding and then let us worry about the airway and the breathing and things.
So our responsibility as first help to a victim is to immediately control that bleeding. This is going to give the victim the best chance of survival until EMS can arrive to continue treatment. Lucky for us, controlling bleeding really only comes down to one thing: applying pressure. Now, we've all heard about applying pressure to wounds, but what exactly does that look like? Are you just running up blindly and putting your hands on someone's wound? How much pressure is enough pressure?
We're just gonna simulate. I just have this towel here. The last thing I want you to do is to panic out of trying to think of what's the right thing to do. Just grab whatever's at hand, put pressure, wait for us to get there. Okay. So using this situation, we're gonna simulate an injury to the arm here. We have an entrance wound on this side, exit wound on this side. What I would do is I would just take this, I would just wrap it around, and I'm just gonna simply just grab your arm like this, and I am just gonna bear hug your arm as tight as I possibly can until my fingers cramp up and I can't hold it anymore.
Okay. And
So-
yeah, he's applying a good amount of pressure. I've heard it's sort of like a hose, right? Like
Yep.
if a hose is running, water's coming out. You can't stop that from putting your hand over it or whatever.
Yep.
Like you want to apply
Yep,
pressure.
you want to apply pressure and you want to kink that sucker off if you can as best as possible. Okay, so femoral, arterial, again, these are going to be the ones that are going to bleed heavily and they're going to bleed fast. So you're going to have to get even more aggressive. And so I would just, again, get up close and personal and just, this may be a situation where I take my body and I actually lean and put all of my weight against there to try to stop that. And you're trying to use, you know, anything in the body itself to wedge that artery up against. More than likely the bone inside there is what you're using to backstop it, or if they're on the ground, you know, you're gonna compress against that ground. So you just, this is gonna be something that's gonna require a ton of pressure. So, yep.
What about the exit wound? Are you trying to squeeze on that side? Or
So yeah, if the exit wound in a situation like this, hopefully it's to where you don't have a wound here and a wound clear up here where, you know, if ideally you would have a wound here and a wound here and you could just, again, use something on the backside, maybe put them down on the ground and just squeeze down and push on that arm. If it was arterial based and they're spurting, whatever side that spurting's coming out of would be the side that I would aggressively attack with my own body weight. Yeah, and then use the other side just to get to sandwich underneath there on the ground. Pressure's your best friend.
You mentioned heads, or unfortunately there's not a lot we can do.
Yeah.
What about necks? Are those kind of the same?
They're gonna bleed, yep, and same thing, just large amounts of pressure. However, the thing that you wanna worry about, as you can see, trachea, you don't wanna occlude the trachea. Yep, I would still apply pressure, but maybe unlike the leg where they're squirting out, I'm not gonna stand on someone's neck.
Yeah.
You know.
So pressure is obviously the key in all of these scenarios, but I wanted to see actually what the difference was when applying pressure. I created a little experiment with a tube of fake blood and a stake to simulate bleeding flesh. Now before I continue, I will give you a warning. This is slightly graphic, so if you're really squeamish, I would recommend skipping ahead to this time in the video. Basically, I took a 7-foot, half-inch vinyl tube, filled it with fake blood, and slid it through a stake. Then I had someone literally blow into one end of the hose, forcing the blood out the other. We did this 3 different times. The first time was a completely open wound. It took about 30 seconds to completely bleed out. The second time was with a secured bandage, and it took nearly a minute to bleed out. Now we couldn't really get anything to stick to the stake, so the blood eventually seeps out of the bottom of the bandage, but I think it still got the point across. Finally, the third time we covered the wound and applied constant pressure. The blood literally slowed to a complete stop, and when I let the pressure and the bandage off, it immediately started bleeding again. Then, reapplying pressure, the bleeding stopped once again. It was pretty cool to actually see that in action. Now obviously this test was not super realistic. It's not intended to replicate how a wound would really look or bleed on a human, but instead it was intended just to compare the effects of open wound versus applying coverage and physical pressure on bleeding. So my follow-up question to this was, what if I have multiple wounds to deal with, or multiple victims at that? There were a few common answers. First, if the second wound is within arm's length, you can use something like a knee to continue applying pressure to that first wound and free your hands to care for others. Another option is tying a cloth or whatever you have around the first wound so it has constant pressure. When tying something to apply pressure, by the way, remember to tie the knot over the wound. This is where the most pressure is. And finally, a third option can be packing the wound. That is, stuffing some form of gauze or cloth into the wound and tying something over it to keep it in place. Generally, this is a technique reserved for times when help is a long way off and direct pressure is not solving the problem, or maybe when you need to go take a hike and leave the victim to find help.
If it begins to get out of hand to where you're not controlling it, then the final step would be a tourniquet. Tourniquets are becoming very widely used. There used to be a very bad taboo with the thought of using a tourniquet. It used to be thought that if you put a tourniquet on, they're of course going to lose their extremity and all this. They're finding that that's not true, that a patient can have a tourniquet on for quite quite a long time before they have any type of injuries that would cause them to lose that extremity just from using the tourniquet. So don't be afraid to use a tourniquet if that's what you feel the victim needs. And there, hopefully you would have like a belt on or something like that. And then if not, then using like a shirt sleeve and just tying it as tight as possible.
So to recap so far, pressure is our best friend. Grab something to put between your hands and the open wound if possible, and apply direct, hard pressure to the wound. Keep in mind there will generally be 2 wounds, an entrance and an exit from the bullet. If possible, use something to allow you to apply pressure to both wounds at once. Otherwise, use the weight of their body to your advantage, and place something under them for one wound and apply direct pressure to the other. Whenever possible, direct pressure should be applied to the wound that is bleeding the most. You can see in this example, I place a sweatshirt underneath him to cover the exit wound, then apply a sweater with direct pressure to his stomach for the entrance wound that is actually bleeding. When necessary, you can also use options such as your knee, tying cloths, packing the wound, or tourniquets to free your hands for other tasks. Up to now, we've only been discussing ways to mitigate bleeding assuming you have nothing but the shirt on your back. But in some cases, you may have a med kit nearby. I know I've got a small kit with me at the range and in my Jeep now at all times. So in situations where it's realistic to have it nearby, it could help to make your job and saving a life, or even your own life, that much easier. You can create your own kit, or there are many fantastic options already out there. I asked Nick for his thoughts on this kit by Wild Hedgehog Tactical.
So my first impression, you literally just handed this to me 10 minutes ago, opened it up, looked at it. The things I like about it is that it's small, compact, there's quite a bit of stuff that's in it. Seems like it's pretty well laid out, and the stuff that's in it seems to be pretty functional for what I would think in a situation like this would be good. And buying something like this would probably be a little bit easier than trying to round up all the miscellaneous pieces of medical equipment to put in your own. You can just buy this, they have already done that for you. So yeah, I would recommend something like this. Like I said, I like it. It's small, compact, easily fit in a bag going to the range, throw it in your truck if you're out hunting or something like that, and keep it on you, and it's not gonna keep up or occupy a lot of space.
I teamed up with Wild Hedgehog Tactical for this video, and they were generous enough to offer a 10% discount on any of their products for GLS viewers. You can find their information and the discount code in the video description below. If you're more of a do-it-yourself kind of person, I also asked Nick what things he'd recommend keeping in a custom-made kit.
The first thing that I would suggest is, and they already have this in here, is some type of glove for you. And that's to protect you. There are people out there that have communicable diseases, and the last thing you want to do is be a good Samaritan, help somebody out, and then in turn get some type of disease that's incurable because of that. This is just a cheap triangle bandage, easy to fasten a tourniquet out of this. There's also a commercial style tourniquet here that I would suggest having some type of commercial tourniquet like this. It's going to be a lot easier, and it's probably going to be more effective and easier to apply. You don't have to make it, it's already made for you. The only other thing that I would add for me personally is I would have multiple ways to create a tourniquet. You have 4 extremities. There's the possibility in, worst case scenario, mass shooting situation where someone has, or you have multiple injuries. So multiple tourniquets to me would be indicated. This would be my primary, the one that I would go to, and then this would be like a secondary backup if I needed it. Just some basic gauze pads. These ones right here are compressed down. I'm assuming once you open this air, they get bigger. So any type of gauze pad, bulky dressing to just help apply that pressure and soak up the blood and things is gonna be things that you're gonna need in there.
If I was gonna keep a custom kit, I would probably just throw the things Nick mentioned in my Vaultec that lives in the Jeep. It's got a gun, a spare mag, and now it's got some latex gloves, gauze, a triangle bandage, a chest bandage, and a tourniquet. The last thing I want to talk about is how to set up the first responders for the most success when they arrive on scene. I asked Nick what would be the ideal setup for him to walk into.
Again, it's going to be case by case, but ideal situation for me is if the victim has been shot, is that they're sitting down in a controlled manner to where they're not freaking out, where we can treat them, and somebody is hopefully applying some pressure and controlling that bleeding, and then we can get in there and further control the bleeding and just take care of the patient. The last thing we want to walk into, and it happens, but it's just pure chaos where, you know, people are running around crazy, hysterical. So any type of calmness on the scene would be ideal for us. And then again, just somebody that's there that's going to relay that pertinent information to us as far as what happened, when it happened, what was involved, and what's been done. And then also any type of like loss of consciousness or anything like that would be also useful to know.
So to recap, first and foremost, get some pressure on the wound and control the bleeding. That's number one. If possible, protect yourself with gloves or at least an intermediary cloth. Second, try to keep control of the situation and keep the victim as calm as possible. Sit them down or have them lie down if possible as well. Call for help or tell someone nearby to call for help, and have an idea of what time the incident occurred and the severity of the incident. But really, that's all there is to this video. I hope the information gives you some confidence, and if you should ever find yourself in an unthinkable situation like this, you'll be ready and you'll be prepared to act. Remember, when shit goes down, leaders' minds get more calm. They assess the situation and act decisively. Be informed, be a leader. I want to give a huge shout out to Nick once again for taking time out of his day to help out with this video. I'd like to thank him and all our other servicemen and women for their tireless efforts in serving our country. I'd also like to thank Vaultek for making this video possible. If you're looking for a portable safe that is as smart as it is secure, look no further than Vaultek. Like I said, I literally use them every single day. I have one on my nightstand, one in my Jeep, and one in my studio. They're what I trust every day for my firearms, my valuables, and the well-being of my family. Find more info on them in the video description below, as well as a coupon code. Thank you for taking time to watch this video. If you found this useful, please hit that thumbs up button. That really does help me out a lot. Please also share this video so we can get as many people informed as possible. Knowledge is power after all, and who knows how many lives this information can save. I plan on releasing a masterclass like this once every month or two, so if you're a company looking to work with me on these, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is in the video description below as well. Thanks again for watching. Give rise.